And just take a minute to reconnect with an altruistic motivation, deep and vast, for the benefit of all sentient beings. Taya ta mune mune maha mune soha. Taya ta mune maha mune soha. Taya ta mune maha mune soha. So hello. So right now we're on page 55 of your main text. And last time we were looking at ways to mature others, or ways or ways to bring out other people's Buddha nature, shifting from the perspective of, before we were talking about us as the student looking at the qualities of a guru. Now we're switching to thinking of ourselves as even just kind of a introductory baby sort of teacher or analyst or healer or however you identify, but you in the support role, how do you help bring others to maturity? So we talked about this verse at the top of page 55, that from the ornament of the Mahayana Sutra, which says, by the first they become vessels, talking about generosity. By the second they take interest, talking about pleasant speech. By the third they practice, talking about working at the aims. And by the fourth they train, talking about consistency in behavior. So it's talking about the things we need to have in order to bring out the best in other people. So I'm just curious what you guys are thinking so far about this topic. Even just the whole concept, helping others to mature. It's an interesting framing, and I don't know if it resonates or if it's sort of challenging or how it lands. So the idea that you need to be generous, and that you need to speak nicely, and that you need to help others engage in ethics, and that you need to be consistent in your behavior. Those is just a working premise. Does that hold true to you, or do you find some objection to that? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think that we can see something parallel that maybe we call joining. Before you talk about anything, you start with a certain link with the other. Generosity and nice talk is a kind of joining the other. It's seems very logic to start with the two first.
When I first looked at this particular teaching, when we were studying the Lam Rinchen at the nunnery, I actually had some obstacles to this teaching when I first read it. I thought, that sounds manipulative. That sounds like they're trying to win me over and they're trying to bribe me. I don't like this. you know, and then I would look at my own teacher and be like, he just gave us all candy and chai. He's trying to win us over. I'm feeling manipulated. Like, it totally aggravated me, you know, and every Wednesday he would like get us Coca-Cola or chai tea, Indian style chai tea. He is forever giving us the offerings from his altar, you know, little candies, you know, as if we were like 12 years old, you know, we're all like grown adults. He's giving us little candies, you know, like we're children. And, you know, and even still, when I've been away for months and I come back, he goes, oh, Yönten, you need some socks? I have some socks for you. And he's like giving me his socks. And I'm just like, what? But over the years, I've come to realize that there's a real skillfulness in that, even though I have a reactivity to that. There's something very skillful there. But anyway, if anyone else is having a certain reaction, that's, I think, quite normal. And I certainly had a big reaction when I first read this.
It's a kind of skill to open the heart. It works on people. The generosity, the speech that is very kind and quiet, it's opening the heart. And I think this is what we want before we take something inside us. First, to be open to new ideas.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we know when it's coming from a false place. You know, so you read this, or I read this, and I think, oh, that sounds so manipulative. It sounds like bribery. It sounds, I don't know, shallow and superficial, and I don't like it. I don't like it. No me gusta. You know, when I first read it, I really was triggered. And then I realized that though, when it actually happens, when it's actually coming from someone who wants me to mature, it's so sweet and it's so beautiful and it is heartwarming. And so to kind of know that if we're the one doing this, it has to be genuine, otherwise it's awful, right? Like it has to be genuine active generosity. And it doesn't actually have to be material things at all, does it, for it to be fully qualified generosity? It doesn't have to be material things in any way. You're giving freedom from fear, mostly in your work. The type of generosity called freedom from fear is basically freedom from judgment, you know, freedom from competitiveness, free from criticism. You know, you're offering that kind of generosity all the time in your practice. And we're trying to offer that all the time in our daily life as people on a path of transformation. And so that type of generosity, you can't really fake it, because if you do fake it, other people will feel it right away and you will seem inauthentic and yucky and it won't work anyway. So I guess all of the dangers in these seemingly simplistic, seemingly superficial strategies to get other people to mature, they're actually incredibly profound and deep when you actually do them. It's just when you first read them, it's like, okay, be nice and give them stuff. What? We're trying to bribe people to grow up. What is this? It's actually far more profound than that. But the danger is there that you could get into I guess just the behaviors of this without the mentality of this. And if you just do the behaviors without the actual mentality or without the actual practice of it, then you're also lying to yourself as someone who is worthy to offer support to anyone. You know, you're being a hypocrite and, you know, you're sort of doing a disservice to your own practice. So I think the first one, generosity, needs the most fleshing out, to remember that generosity is offering loving kindness, offering freedom from fear, offering dharma, which means timely advice. It means offering advice when there is an opening, when there is a receptivity, when people ask, whether in words or in their energy, but kind of knowing when to offer wisdom and when to pull back. And then offering material goods, you know? And so offering material goods, it is nice to have something tactile and tangible in terms of an exchange between people, even if the substance of that isn't anything insignificant, you know, isn't anything significant rather. So the fact that my teacher would give us all little candies at first would be, you know, kind of like, first of all, we don't want to get diabetes. First of all, sugar's not good for us. Why are you giving us sugar? We're not children, you know, and all these thoughts could come up. But then if you just like relaxed into it, it was like, so nice. That's so nice. That was on his altar. That was something he thought was a beautiful, worthy offering for the Buddhas that was in his room. And now that he's offered it, he's giving it to us. And it's only a little bit. It's not like a giant chocolate bar, you know, and just like a little bit of sweetness before going into heavy philosophy. That's really sweet and skillful. Like that kind of kindness actually is quite touching. You know, and in the fact that we're all grown up and we don't get treats anymore because we're grown-ups, it's actually sort of sweet and nurtures the child in us that, you know, kind of feels like, oh, I got a present, you know, it makes you happy. So it, you know, even brings up that kind of superficial happiness, which is a gateway to then deeper forms of happiness. And so if you can think about ways, you know, even if it's just an exchange of books that you loan each other, even if it's just something so simple like, here, I made some pie, here's a piece of the pie, you know, it's so simple, but these kind of energetic exchanges with the physical form can be quite powerful, but you have to be skillful about it. Otherwise you kind of are inflicting gifts, and that creates its own difficulty and power imbalance. So generosity is something that helps nurture others mainly through building connection, right? You're sort of, it's just ways to build the relationship. Yeah, so when there's this open heart of generosity and this open aspect of generosity, what you're really doing is laying down the groundwork of safety. Yeah, because once the connection is strong, people can hear more from you. And so, you know, you just, or I just reflect on my own life and think, when have I been able to hear advice? When someone has been critical in a way that was trying to help me, when have I actually listened, actually believed them, and actually taken it on board? As opposed to all the other times when people have been critical and I've been either hurt or angry or dismissive or whatever the other reactions are. You know, what is it that makes us hear someone else's advice? And it's usually that we have a good relationship with them. Yeah, you want to think, well, I hear criticism that's true. No, that's not the main criteria for us. For us, we hear criticism if it's coming from someone we love or someone we have a heart connection with. And then if they're telling us a hard truth, we might have the space to listen to it. Do you know what I mean? Right? So use your own self as a guinea pig and ask, what makes me receptive? What makes me open? What makes me able to examine the things about my internal behavior and external behavior in a way that I could actually shift and change something and confront a really hardwired habit? What are the conditions that would actually allow that to happen? Yeah, and one of them is this, you know, building a strong relationship between people. Yeah, Talia.
Well, I wanted to say that I thought that in generosity, another thing that maybe could go is responsibility or ethics. As a therapist, you know, you open the door for somebody, and I think that a big part is the responsibility that you take on person, caring for him emotionally, caring for him. So I think that in a sense, ethics comes into that. Even I don't know if I would look at it as generosity, but I think it opens the door. The person that feels that you care for him.
Yeah, you're just sort of intuiting the full teaching on generosity. Actually, the full teaching on generosity is that it needs to have all the other perfections in it. So to be full generosity, you need to have the generosity of generosity, the ethics of generosity, the patience of generosity, the joyous effort of generosity, the concentration of generosity, the wisdom of generosity. And if they're all in there, you know, together with bodhicitta, then it's the perfection of generosity. So yeah, ethics is key. And, you know, you saw ethics is just hammered in the section of assessing a teacher and the qualities of a teacher that, you know, even if you're only getting a teacher that has 1/8 of the qualities, one of those better be ethics. And it's huge, isn't it? But, you know, the relationship between ethics and responsibility, I think, is an interesting place, because responsibility is such a tricky concept, isn't it? Because when is it going too far and becoming, I don't know, enabling or becoming overly identified with you as the healer? And when is it becoming the good altruism that we all want, which is like taking responsibility for the welfare of all sentient beings without any pressure to solve anything today, without any expectation that we are the main force in that, but still holding it as an ideal of I have responsibility for all sentient beings, in particular this one in front of me who I'm in a session with. I think that's a really important place to just sit with, of what is really deep responsibility that's free from any kind of attachment, and isn't getting lost in any kind of ego trips of needing to fix anything or solve anything, or beating yourself up for not being as effective as you thought you would be, or et cetera, et cetera. That one's so tricky. Is there a whole discussion about that in self-psychology, about what exactly responsibility is? Or what it should be? Is that a conversation you guys have? Or is it just kind of a, you know, it comes up because it's a natural thing to come up?
There's a lot of talking about ethics, which I think is maybe close.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know the framework of self-psychology nearly as well as just kind of basic CBT and things like that my dad does. But I remember when I used to work for a crisis hotline, like a suicide crisis hotline in Australia. It was, you know, a training I did just for my own personal development, right? Why not? And this course on suicide prevention, you know, people would ring the phone and they would say, you know, I want to kill myself and I've got the pills, and your job as the person answering the phone was to talk them down and give them resources and things. And they had a lot of conversations about what is your responsibility in terms of being the person who's just caught someone at their worst moment. And to say that they, you know, they lived their whole life before they met you and survived this far. Try to minimize your own importance while at the same time taking full responsibility for this moment. You know, it's like they survived up until now without you. You are not the biggest deal in this conversation, right? And the fact that they called means that there's already an opening for health. So explore that, you know, do what you can, use the strategies there, and they still might kill themselves. And that won't be your fault, even though it's your responsibility to help. It's not your fault if you fail, right? And it's such a delicate conversation, right? Because that's like, you know, the worst case scenario. You know, most people, if you're not taking on responsibility in the right way, it's just a less effective session, or it's not working for long-term health or whatever, but they might not die as a result of it. So I remember that conversation coming up a lot with suicide prevention. And so I am curious, because a lot of burnout seems to be people taking responsibility in the wrong way and putting the wrong kind of pressure on themselves, either as the clinician or as who they should be in their family, together with the work that they do. You know, and they get burnt out trying to be everything to everyone, or trying to do everything in the best way. And that seems to be a component of some people's burnout. But I'm curious what you guys think, because it's a big issue and it's a big topic in Buddhism. How do you help others mature without making it about you? What are the things that interrupt your ability to bring others to maturity? What are the things that prevent you from being effective? So it's a good point of similarity. I'm just wondering if there's parallels.
I'll add and say that I think, I hope I can be heard, because I hear you on and off, but I think that the whole concept of self-object at its best is sitting in front of the other in a way that you are fully responsible, but you're not burnt out. It's very, very delicate, and how you get there, I don't know. I mean, we're trying all to learn, but there's this one point where sometimes at my best, and theoretically more or less, mostly and not practically, but I feel that I can do anything, and it doesn't take from me everything. I wish I could be there all the time. Of course I can't, but there is one point where you can do it. And it is an ethical and practical stance, which, I mean, we're all trying to get to, but I think the concept maybe is in dialogue with what you are teaching us now.
Yeah, because there are those sessions that might be hard work in terms of you need to focus really hard and be on your, be on your game, as it were. But they don't take life force from you. They're not draining. You feel really life affirmed by the whole process. When you're in the right kind of presence, when you're in the right kind of connection, the work, even if it's long days and lots of focus, you're not burnt out at the end of the day. You're just like, I need to have a sleep so I can do it again tomorrow. But, that was a good day. But then there's times when you're focusing in a way that's not as skillful and it does become draining. And that point is an important point of investigation, because especially when things are routine, it's easy to slip from what you know is the ideal version of focus into a version of focus that is less skillful, but looks right on the surface, and is still getting the job done enough, but there's something underneath it that's sort of gradually depleting you.
I also think that it's, the self object, the whole point is that it's not about you in that sense. And you are focusing, you're trying to help the patient, the person be himself, to bring out his potential. So there's something very different in the way you position yourself. It's you really are not, you're focused on him and trying to bring him to be himself, and there's different kind of focus. It's not, I think it devoids the guilt that can rise in the situation, and you don't feel, it's a different way of feeling responsible. It's a big, big ethical responsibility, but it's not from a guilty point, I think, if you can be there. Not always easy.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the point I want us to really explore, is that why is it that when it's not about you, whatever service you're offering, when it's not about you, then it gives you life. When it's not about you, it's energizing. As soon as it becomes about you, it's depleting and life-sucking and gradually exhausting. It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because it seems counterintuitive. And this is what we need to understand about the fault of self-cherishing, right? Self-cherishing says, make it about you because you need to be protected. And if you don't think about you, no one else will. You, protect you. And in that very process, you exhaust yourself. And as soon as you stop thinking about you and you're there for the other, not in a martyred way, not in a weird codependent way, but in a healthy way for the other, you've got so much energy, don't you? And so to notice that wisdom that you already have about, quote, a good session and a less good session, and just to pull that wisdom forefront, especially in tired moments, of what is actually fatiguing me is not the work, it's my approach to the work that's fatiguing me. What do I need to adjust so that I'm not as fatigued? While at the same time remembering that we only have a certain amount of focus and concentration at our level. And so it's inevitable that after enough hours, we're just gonna lose the ability to stay fully for the other if we push it too long beyond just our physical capability. So, I've said this before, but one of the biggest pieces of the spiritual path is pacing. Yeah, pacing, and how to have continuity without a big burst of energy and then a recovery and then a big burst and then a recovery. How to have kind of continuous effort that gradually builds strength, because it's more long-term sustainable and it's more efficient and more joyful. But yeah, just sitting with that I think all of you already know of, really beautiful, enriching session that had nothing to do with you. It wasn't about you at all. And it was so enriching, and you were happy and uplifted and joyful afterwards. And then those sessions where you felt really depleted and heavy afterwards, what was the difference in your thinking, and what was the, see how that plays out. Helps us understand the lie of self-cherishing, because then when you're in your daily life and with your family, you bring this same idea of, when I'm for them, I have energy. When I make it about me, I'm depleted. And yet if I'm already depleted, don't I deserve and need support? Of course. But how does that look, and what is the way that will actually bring health? Have you found that in your life, when you're the most depleted, when you're the most tired, when you're the most kind of needy or irritable, is when you get the least support? And then when you feel kind of like back to yourself and kind of grounded again, then people want to help you and want to support you. And you're like, where were you yesterday when I was in a bad mood? Yeah, I needed you yesterday. I'm fine now. But now that you're fine, people are like attracted to you. Right? So just kind of exploring that and see the way self-cherishing lies. It's important in your work, but it's important in your life, you know, just to look at the way life is. And at the root of this is understanding Buddhanature, because the fact is that your mind is empty of inherent existence, and that your potential is exponential, and that everything that is ignorance driven blocks you from touching that. So the more you're in the truth of interdependence and the fact of dependent arising, the closer you are to reality. And isn't it interesting that the closer you are to reality, the easier joy comes? Yeah, it's almost like it's our birthright or it's our nature to be happy and content, and that everything else on the top that's ego-driven interferes with our natural happiness. It's not like you have to inject happiness into the path. The mind itself is very contented and very joyful the closer it gets to reality. Compassion and loving kindness are closer to reality than anger and attachment. That's why they make you happy when you're connected to them. It's an interesting thing to sit with. And there's a type of logic to it, but I think more than the logic to it, we can touch our experience of it. Yeah.
I think it can be difficult for baby teachers or like students that can feel that they are dependent on their success with disciples or
yeah, disciple, patient, client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that someone is observing them, and you could be very attached to the specific patient or.
Yeah, definitely. And that, you know, it's another pathway to empathy, you know, to realize that in the beginning, you can know where you're aiming towards and you know the headspace you can land in that's healthy, but doesn't mean that you're always there just by knowing it. You know, just by knowing it doesn't mean that you land there consistently, and that the consistency just comes from time and practice, but it means also thinking about it, because it can sort of feel like you have, I don't know about you, but when I first started teaching, it would feel sometimes like I had a magic session where everything connected and people understood me and it all went really well, like it was by chance. Yeah, when in fact, no, my mind was in the right space. And so the content I delivered was more effective. Yeah, and so maybe it feels that way for you in sessions, that it was a magic session by chance. Things worked out by chance. And no, you had the right headspace going into it. And of course, the patient had the right headspace coming into it as well. But that, you know, these things don't happen magically or randomly or coincidentally, that you can orchestrate them. Yeah, and that you're a huge piece of the condition of that. They are the cause, but you're a huge condition for their healing. And so if you're in the best space, it's much more likely that you'll get that sense of flow and that kind of, you know, magic feeling session. So to stop thinking it's by chance or by magic or random that you have these great connections, is that it's very much about the headspace you're bringing to it. And, you know, yes, of course, their headspace, but just kind of remembering that the life-giving part of it is your own motivation towards them getting out of your own way. Yeah. Yes, easier said than done, gradually.
I think, Yönten, that connect what you asked before, what you call headspace, or the right headspace, we call the self-object presence, okay, or being a self-object matrix. And in that right space, it means there is a space from yourself. It's not just not about you. Actually, it's practicing of being empty of your own self in order to be there for a other. So I think that that's where it connects. So when it happens, it's not by chance, but it's not because of you. It's because of something that is, it's an ideal or a refuge or something that is higher or beyond you anyway.
It's not about you, but you were an active force in creating it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And no nihilism. No nihilism. Yeah. Middle way, there is a person.
She knows me well. So it's something that when we're thinking about maturing others and then we're looking at these kind of very sweet little lists, you know, don't let the sweetness deceive you from their profundity. Sometimes, you know, I was reading Cohort the other day about archaic self-objects because of some of our discussions. So I was reading it and I thought, he's kind of the opposite of Dharma in a way, not in the premise, but in the word choices. He says these incredibly elaborate, dense sentences to talk about like one small, simple thing. You know, and the Dharma is kind of the other way. There's this one small, simple thing that needs all of this elaboration. You know, and so maybe together there's a beautiful collaboration that can happen. That I was laughing. I was like, wow, I just read a whole paragraph about one small thing, you know, and it was brilliant and articulate, and I see why you love him. But that was the conclusion I came to. So in a way, this is the opposite. Don't let the simplicity deceive you. Yeah. So then this pleasant speech, let's jump down to where it says a somewhat elaborate explanation here on page 55. It says there are two types of pleasant speech. First, pleasant speech associated with worldly customs means that you first assume a clear expression free of anger, give a smile, then please living beings in worldly ways, such as inquiring after their health, etc. The second type, pleasant speech associated with presenting the perfect teaching, means you instruct living beings in the teaching for their benefit and happiness, beginning with teachings on developing faith, ethical disciplines, study, generosity, and wisdom. So this was written in the 14th century. Yeah, this particular text was written in the 14th century by Lama Tsongkhapa based on the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, you know, 2,600 years ago. Isn't it interesting that worldly conventions remain relatively the same? That basic pleasant speech is smile and ask after their health. You know, it's a bit basic, isn't it? And if you're someone who identifies as a spiritual practitioner or a philosophical person or an intellectual, it can feel very basic to say, how are you doing? How is your health? How is the weather? How are the kids? How is the garden? These kind of things. And yet those are softening the ground, aren't they? You know, they're kind of getting you warmed up for the profound. And there is profundity in those kind of simple conversations, which is just saying, I care about you. So it can be the sort of thing where it feels too superficial, or it doesn't feel like it's the deep work to ask this kind of stuff or to be in pleasant speech of this type. It can be, you know, it can feel sort of sugary sweet, but actually it's softening the ground, and it's just showing care, isn't it? So it doesn't have to be that you literally give a smile and please beings in worldly ways, such as inquiring after their health. For some people, if you smile all the time, they get really suspicious and think you're a weirdo. And, you know, for Americans, you really have to smile consistently all the time, always, and show all of your teeth, because that is how we are trained. But that is not the case in every culture, is it? So it's like, you know, in accordance with the laws of the land and the person in front of you and what you see is resonating for them. Talk about ordinary things. Yeah. Talk about ordinary things, which I'm sure you guys do in a session, right? You don't like say, so tell me about your intense sexual trauma. Also, the weather's nice. You know, you don't just like go straight in, do you? Yeah, they're like, tell me about your worst fears and all of your insecurities. Yeah, oh, I mean, do you want some coffee? Right? Like, you don't just like dive in, do you? You got to soften the ground a bit. Yeah, but I think it's interesting that this is written right in there, because sometimes people can misunderstand Buddhism and think that we only talk about high holy topics because we're talking about Don't have idle speech. Don't be frivolous with your speech. It's not about the content. It's about the motivation. You know, you could talk about sports for 20 minutes and it'd be really profound. It's, you know, the motivation that you're bringing to it. Yeah. So the second type, presenting, associated with presenting the perfect teachings. This is just talking about content that's deeper and more about specific ways of transformation. So you need both. The avenues of pleasant speech are as follows. To an enemy who would kill you, you say helpful words without fault in your heart. With the very dull-witted, you willingly rise to the challenge, tirelessly giving talks on teachings and causing them to adhere in virtue. So it's now elaborating into with people that are very, very difficult, angry, harmful, and then with people who are just, you know, they're a little bit slow in making connections, and they take a lot of repetition and a lot of going over the same ground again and again. It's acknowledging here that those types of folks exist in our life, and it doesn't mean that they're not suitable disciples, or it doesn't mean that they're not suitable students or suitable clients or patients. Yeah, so it's naming it, right? It's not saying when you meet these people, write them off. They're a lost cause for this life. Wait until they mature and then they can come into the Dharma. And saying, no, there's ways to work with them as well. So of course, you know, it's a very short sentence for a very big process to say to an enemy who would kill you, you say helpful words without a fault in your heart. It sounds very, yeah, overly simplistic, doesn't it? But we could unpack that quite a bit. How would that work? What are helpful words? Well, it has to be skillful to the situation and the person in front of you, doesn't it? To the dull-witted, you rise to the challenge. I think that that's a nice way of framing it. Of, okay, this person needs a bit more work to understand what's being said. Connections are not coming as quickly to them because of their prior experience. Yeah, because of what came before this moment, they don't have as much familiarity with concepts of transformation. They don't have as much familiarity with things like, I don't know, empathy and altruism. So it's just gonna need more repetition. And I'm gonna need to be creative and think about different ways to say these things than the way I always say them. And actually that's quite enriching for my own process because, you know, teaching is like an analytical meditation. You know, I think this idea of rising to the challenge, this is shifting from feeling defeated because someone like needs more work, because that's just a concept, isn't it? What does it mean they need more work than someone else? It's the same minutes. It's the same amount of minutes in the room. Yeah, why are you calling some things more work and some things less work? Because there's the kind of work that you find fun and entertaining, and there's the kind of work you find boring and repetitive, isn't it? Why do we, you know, in our mind frame, oh, this is a hard class, oh, this is an easy class, oh, this is a hard session, this is an easy session. It's the same amount of minutes. Yeah, and so just kind of thinking about what's a creative way to do this thing because it's not coming so easily for them, rather than feel kind of defeated and burdened by it. Yeah. Okay.
Why, I wanted to ask, but why is it called harder work for somebody else? It can be, it doesn't have, it's different work. Why is it comparative in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, ultimately it's not, right? Ultimately, it's all much of a muchness, one taste and emptiness, but for us, we do quantify things this way, even if we'd rather not, even if we try not to. I'm sure in our mind, we're like, this one's going to be a little bit hard. Yeah. So it's just kind of navigating around our own constructs. It's not saying that they are harder work from their own side, but we've made them harder work because of our own habituations and familiarities, you know. It's a bit like that. It can also be just a recognition that this person in front of me doesn't have an affinity with my communication style and I don't have an affinity with theirs just because of prior habituation. So would they move more quickly along the path of transformation if they had a different teacher, a different analyst, a different situation, and there's no fault in them and no fault in me, but it's just not an easy marriage, you know? So it's not thinking that any of that exists from the side of the person. It's just because of our own relative that we're bringing to it. Yeah. And yeah, we talked about this at the nunnery a lot, because there's, there was maybe 20 or 30 nuns there at one point when we were doing our advanced study. And people would often ring up Chenrezig Institute where we lived and say, can I talk to a nun about my practice? Which basically meant, can I have free therapy? But it would often be the case that someone would come and talk to us, and you would feel, oh, actually this nun is going to be the one for them. Even though we can get good work done between us, since there's all these other nuns, I'm going to, hook them up with this one or hook them up with that one, and we would know what each of us was particularly good at, or the kind of person that we had an affinity with. I seem to always have all of the rough guys with tattoos that just came from prison. So they knew, send me the tattooed guys, and and we would tease and laugh and joke and not be too proper. And then one of the nuns really, really was good with teenagers who were having angst and existential crises and sort of, invested in their darkness. She was really good with them. So it's not to say that any of them were hard work from their own side, but depending on the affinity of the nun, they became hard work or not. And we could choose to make that a practice and keep a hard one, or we could say maybe it's healthier or easier for everyone involved if we shift them to another nun. So that's all, I'm sure calls you have to make in your life all the time. Is it healthy to stay together or not? Different than thinking that from their own side they're difficult, right? They became difficult as the result of, their history and the conditions. It's not like they're like an innately difficult, right? They have their Buddha nature, they have their clear and knowing consciousness, just like everyone else, but the habits of ignorance piled on top of that have become particularly problematic for transformation. So they are going to be hard for most people, except for, people that are more clairvoyant or people that are more skillful. And it could be that actually transformation isn't possible in that life, though ultimately it is. But those are quite the rare cases. Those are very rare cases to find someone like that. No, not necessarily everyone. No, I don't think so. I think there are periods in our life where we're not open to change and we're not open to transformation. And I think those blockage periods happen to all of us all throughout our life, but that's different than being of the disconnected family. That's just, an obstacle has arisen and we've gotten a stuck point, but the basic quality of our mind is still seeking, wanting, valuing transformation. It's just we're a bit stuck right now, yeah, because of whatever conditions. So, to be truly of the disconnected family, you have to be actively wanting to hurt people on purpose. Yeah, actively on purpose, wanting to hurt people, actively against transformation of all types. You have to be really in a bad way. Yeah. And, unfortunately, people like that wind up in power occasionally, but they're actually rare people. Yeah. There are a lot of people who hurt people, but not as their main thing in life. Yeah, there's a lot of people that incidentally hurt others, or a certain kind of people they target, or whatever, but a truly disconnected family is quite rare. I have a friend who works in prisons, and she's able to work in prisons. It's like these are murderers and rapists and all these, and they're not necessarily of the disconnected family. They're just well habituated to negativity, but there's still some openness there for transformation.
It will relate to what you're saying a bit later, but I wanted to say that when I read these 4 stages, I felt that maybe they are not just like a selling strategy, but also a process that one should go through in order to be for another. And even these types, maybe they're not out there, but inside us. And it's like these התנגדויות, תעזרו לי. These resistances, thank you, inside that we should deal with before or during being for the other.
Exactly. Yeah, I think 100%, 100%. Yeah. There's one level where they're just kind of external strategies that are useful, and then really, ultimately, they are developmental stages within ourselves. Absolutely. Yeah, very well put. And, you know, I think that that's the key to the whole thing too, is that if we get lost in just seeing them as strategies, they really won't work, you know, or they'll have limited benefit, very limited benefit. But if they're things that we integrate and take on as true and ways to orient ourselves, then they're going to be hugely beneficial. Yeah, it's interesting. And so, you know, the first they become vessels. That's an interesting word choice, isn't it? By the first they become vessels. So if we are having a generous heart, they become open. Yeah, if we are open, they open. And then, you know, a second they take interest. So if we're sort of pouring out, you know, beauty, then they kind of lean in, you know, it's quite interesting. So starting from you, then they mirror you, don't they? Yeah, it's interesting. And so then this next one, yeah, yeah, exactly. And I don't know, to me, this is really, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to ask, what is a catalyst? You know, what is something to ignite interest, or to ignite the urge to transform, or to wake up self-awareness? Because, you know, we know all of us have this Buddha seed, this Buddha nature. We have this good heart that wants development, and then there's just so much crap on the top of it, you know, just so many habits and habits and habits that prevent us from nurturing our own nature into its development. And yet I think we all want to, and I think we're all happier when we are in these spaces of transformation. So to me, it's so interesting to look at all the different methods there are in the world to get people to wake up and have self-awareness. You know, really anything that does that we could call Dharma. It doesn't have to be Buddhist. You know, anything that makes people have some self-awareness and engage in altruism, we would call Dharma. Yeah.
So it's very similar to the idealizing self-object that can see the potential before it is seen, it's like we learn in another course, it's like a resonance to something that is not yet there, but then it develops, then it grows.
Yeah, exactly. It's like even if they don't even know they have Buddha nature, by you talking to their Buddha nature, it sort of calls it forward and then into fruition. You know, even if they would never name it as that or know that it's there. Yeah, but by us orienting in that way, that's always seeing the potentiality, then it calls it forward, or it brings it out. It's getting them to practice what they've heard, you know. So it's like, first they're open, then you can teach them things. Once they've been taught things, how do you get them to do something about it? Yeah, so working at AIMS is to try and get them to practice the wisdom that they're coming to. So they, you know, they have a breakthrough and they have an insight, they have a new knowing. How do you get them to then move that forward into their daily life and not just take it as, oh, that was interesting. That's why I do that. You know, moving it from just an interesting connection that's been made into, now my speech needs to change in this way, or my behavior can change in this way, or I can do more of this and less of that. So, so that's the third one.
Yeah, I think the teacher has here a role, because even the fact that you send us every week meditation to practice, I thought this is the third one. It's help us.
Yeah, it's still, because it's still your decision whether or not you do it,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah, it's still your decision whether or not you do it or how you do it or whatever, you know. So all we can do from the side of the analyst or the side of the teacher is to say, here,
Yeah.
and they can take it or not take it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like, remember how that was fun in class? Remember how we talked about that? Remember how you like that? Do you want to do it?
Yes.
You don't have to. You know, it's a bit like that.
So this is the third one, no?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But
It's like an invitation. It's an invitation.
I think it's more than an invitation, because I think that if a therapist or a practitioner, if a teacher is practicing himself, you know, he's a model in a sense, or even deeper, the connection between them, something of the person, the therapist, affects the patient, affects him through who he is, or they join in that place. I mean, if you can help him join in that place, and then it becomes something that it's inside of him. I don't know if it's saying it correctly, but it's like the motivation comes also from the connection, that brings out more motivation to do something, or to want the change, or to believe in the change, even that it's possible.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I think it's also part of why it's easier to, for example, to meditate when you're in a group of people meditating with someone who knows the meditation well, leading you through it. It's sometimes easier to focus than if you just do it by yourself, because there's the modeling and there's the holding and there's the someone who's more familiar, and then there's the fact that you're in it together, and there's all these different conditions, which still you have to do your own process for you to be having a process. You know, it's not like you're not involved in the process, but there are many more things holding you, yeah, which make that process a little bit smoother, a little bit easier. Yeah, so you know, to say working at Ames, you know, by the third they practice, if they're in the mood to practice, right? By the third they practice if they're in the mood to practice. But us as the person in the support role, we have to keep offering the invitation and, as you said, the example, you know, and the modeling. Just keep offering it, and, you know, if they're going to take it, they'll take it, but there needs to be something they're offering, you know, not just ideas, but here's practice, you know, not just, you know, new connections and insights, but then what you do with it offered somehow, even if not in words, even if just in modeling. But yeah, I think it brings their potential forward. And then similar to that, you need to have consistency in your own behavior as the support person. So you don't have to be perfect, but you know, you do have to practice what you preach, right? And if you're not particularly mentally healthy and then you're trying to help other people become mentally healthy, it's less effective. Even if you know the right things to say and the right way to be, the impact is more limited if you're not in a great space yourself. So it's straightforward stuff, but, you know, we really need to make it personal and ask, you know, how do I live in these different stages? The pleasant speech one kind of goes on, and I don't know if it's interesting or not, but I'll just read it quickly and see what you think. It says, to devious beings who deceive their masters, abbots, etc., and engage in wrongdoing, you speak pleasantly with helpful words and without anger, teaching even the most difficult persons. So, you know, there are people that pretend to want transformation, but they're BSing you, right? They're having all sorts of obstacles, and they'll say all the right things and agree or whatever, and then actually not ever change, as well as people that are more obviously doing this, but this is talking about the devious, right? And so maybe you've come across this where someone is kind of going to therapy, but they really have no interest in changing. They kind of like the identity of being someone who's going through this, maybe. I get this in classes sometimes, people that like the idea of being a Buddhist or like the idea of being a meditator, but they're actually not practicing at all and they're not meditating at all. It's just another ego trip. But when you talk to them, they'll say all the right things. Yeah, but you know it's BS, right? You know they're deceiving you. So with these ones, to call them on it seems to be the thing to do, but actually it's not the thing that's going to bring them to maturity. To bring them to maturity, it's saying here you need a type of patience that can bear their deception. Yeah, that can cope with their deception and not necessarily confront them, but just to keep flooding them with acceptance and love and acceptance and love, and see if eventually they start to connect with the teachings and eventually release the need to be so deceptive. So it's interesting, and I don't know if you agree with this strategy or not, but when you're with deceptive people, to say you're lying and here's why, does that help them? You know, it might be satisfying, but is it helpful? You know, yeah, it's a quiet conversation in the back of your head where you go, I think that they're saying nonsense to me, but I wish them well. Let's just hold the space for that nonsense and, you know, not give up on them. Yeah, it's a effective strategy. I mean, I've seen it play out in class a lot with my teacher Khensa Rinpoche. There's often a type, like kind of an archetype of a real strong intellectual who maybe has studied Greek philosophy and has maybe studied, you know, different Eastern philosophies. And then they come to the Dharma class with my teacher who's kind of like a, you know, a big Tibetan Lama, you know, who looks all kind of traditional and exotic. And they want to, you know, have an argument with him and prove that they know more than him, or prove that they've studied all the same things that he's studied, and they're coming with a big wave of ego with the aspect of, I'm just asking a question, but really it's like a big ego thing. And he's so sweet to them, you know, he just says, oh, you're a very smart person. Oh, very smart person. You know, he really floods them with validation. You know, and the rest of the class is kind of cringing, like, wow, this guy is really arrogant. Wow, this is full on, you know, wow, does he know how he sounds? But the teacher's response is just incredibly loving and saying, oh, well, you've really studied so much. And he can do it in a way that doesn't sound condescending. You know, he can do it in a way that's, he genuinely is naming, you have studied a lot. You are a smart person. I see all of that, and I'm mirroring that back to you. And like, you know, you can predict it. After a few minutes, the person settles and relaxes and then says, oh, so actually I was wondering, how do you practice compassion? You know, and they'll be able to ask their very like small, simple, embarrassing question after they've kind of proven that they're brilliant. You know, but if they had been, if my teacher had gone right in there with an argument and sort of showed them the flaws in their logic or the deficiencies in their knowledge, they just become more defensive. You know, it's not a recipe for overcoming arrogance. Karina?
Yeah, I just want to say that's a very coherent answer, because in the chapter that we had to read for the next lesson, chapter 5, Cohort is especially talking about the patient that is lying out of grandiosity. Do you remember? And it's the same. It's not that they want to lie. They really want to be as big as they're presenting themselves because they are hurting their grandiosity. And the good therapist, like the best teacher, won't see their grandiosity as what it is, just really as somebody that needs something else in order not to lie or deceive.
Yep. No, it's good to know that there's that parallel. It's you know, it's a struggle when people are being outrageous and telling big lies, and you know that they're being inauthentic. It's a struggle to meet that with not wanting to confront it at all. It's hard. But if you already have had this thought process before coming into contact with a person like this, you've got more mental space than to just give that validation that they need. You can kind of, you know, preempt your own reactions by settling first and being like, what do they need? Right. What's actually going to help? Right. Okay. Yeah, it is interesting to see also in the monasteries where they do debate every night for hours and hours, that the training in the monastic discipline is to get used to stating a position strongly, and then if you're wrong, letting it go. To be able to land on a conclusion fearlessly. Yeah, to say, this is how I think it is. And then to be confronted by, you know, 5 other guys shouting at you, clapping in your face and saying, your reasoning is flawed, you know, and they clap right in your face. And it's so full on, but they do it every day, and it makes their egos really relax because they get used to being wrong is not the end of the world. And actually, if I want to move forward with my knowledge, I need to land on what I think is true right now. If I'm always kind of like, maybe it's like this, and I never really land, then I won't know if I'm right or wrong. You know, it's just kind of living in ambiguity. So it's like land on the conclusion, but land lightly enough to be challenged on it. So for us as practitioners to kind of get used to being fearless about stating, here's what I think. Here's how I think life is. Here's what I think ideals are. And then someone says, yes, but I think this. And if it's superior logic, you go, huh, you're quite right. I'll adjust my view. You know, it's not how we're trained to communicate, is it? To give way with our opinion if we meet superior logic. But, you know, if you get used to it, then it's more fun. It's more fun. And then you don't become one of those practitioners who has to display your brilliance in order to feel, I don't know, your grandiosity being soothed or whatever. You present what your understanding is so far, and then you get challenged by your fellow students, right? So you're not challenged by the teacher. That comes the next day in class. So, you know, who has the correct understanding? How do you know of your, you know, 5 classmates who is understood correctly? By testing each of your opinions against logic. Yeah, so you might adjust your understanding based on the superior logic of your friends, or you might adjust your logic because you're caving under peer pressure, you know? And so it's an interesting kind of dance to explore. But then the next day in class, the teacher will re-explain it based on, you know, you guys having fleshed it out. So yeah, there's a conclusion that you're hopefully going to come to. But even if it's a conclusion that's been the conclusion for thousands of years, if there's a new superior logic coming to it, we're willing to give way. Right? That's why His Holiness says, if science proves something definitively to be true, that Buddhists have thought the opposite is true, then we will agree with science. Yeah, for, you know, for thousands of years, we believed that Mount Meru was the center of the universe. And then, you know, and in the Abhidhamma Kosha, it talks about that. And then, you know, scientists said, actually, if Mount Meru is Mount Everest, and we look at this particular universe system, I don't really think it's the center. Here's some reasons why. His Holiness went, oh, okay, so it's not then. You know, so this is the thing, is that if there is superior logic and superior information, even that will change, you know, a pre-existing idea that we've held for hundreds of years, thousands of years. We're willing to change if we meet with superior logic. Yeah, and do.
To learn by heart.
Oh, right, learn by heart. Yeah, it's not, no, it's not that simplistic. No, you're supposed to bring your own creativity and your own life experience to what you've memorized. Yeah, so there's what you've memorized, but how do you know if what you've memorized is true or not? You have to pull it apart, right? You have to pull it apart. So of course, in the beginning, it's just very simple things, and it is as you described, like the little kids, the tiny monks and the tiny nuns learn how to debate using things like color and shape. So the logical syllogism will be, take a white horse, it is white. And then you're supposed to say yes or no. And if you say, yes, a white horse is white, then your opponent will say, ha, therefore it's a color, you lose, you know, like that. So you're learning how to play with logic. right, in the beginning, but eventually you get more and more creativity with it and more of your own experience with it, but it has to be tethered to logic. Yeah, has to be tethered to logic. But, you know, that's why we have enough openness in our religion to give way and accept science if the science reasoning is superior to our reasoning. Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, the point here that I'm trying to convey is to be comfortable with being wrong is a great freedom. And it means that it's easier to get into wisdom because you can land on your conclusions and give up your conclusions when you meet with superior logic, and not everything is about your ego and your emotions. Because if everything's about your ego and your emotions, transformation becomes much delayed. Yeah, so to kind of be comfortable to not be this sort of student, right? So we're talking about working with these kinds of students that are deceptive or arrogant or whatever, but we ourselves need to work on not being those kind of students so that it's easier to play with ideas and not to be so fearful of being wrong, you know? So then in order that persons whose minds have not matured may eliminate obscurations and be reborn in happy realms, you give discourses to them on preliminary practices, generosity and ethical discipline. So generosity and ethical discipline are the main topics in some forms of Buddhism and the main thing that are taught to lay people. So in Tibetan Buddhism, everything is taught now to both lay people, monks, nuns, everybody, and there's more equality of content that anybody who wants to can be advanced scholar, advanced practitioner. Some of the other traditions cater more scholastic training to just the monks and the nuns, and then the lay people just focus on being generous and ethical, and generosity and ethics is the main focus of their life, and they hope that in their next life they're able to practice more advanced things. So it's kind of a, you know, it's again a disposition issue, how people like to train. So just remembering to do that reading in this book during the break. And you can read the rest of this section at page 55 on your own. It's variations on the theme, so it shouldn't be, you know, anything that new or groundbreaking from what we've already talked about. And I'll see you after the break. Okay.
Thank you.